In the empty streets of Shinjuku, trucks moved quietly, carrying large amounts of mana crystals. The city had been evacuated and no citizens remained. As the trucks came to a stop, workers began unloading the massive quantities of mana crystals onto the deserted streets. Yuri Orlov, the powerful Russian hunter, observed the scene closely. There were about 200,000 tons of mana crystals, more than enough to power up the magic circle he was about to create. The Japanese personnel who were assisting him watched nervously, knowing the importance of the situation. Their eyes followed Yuri's every move, understanding that the success of the plan depended on him. Yuri began to cast a powerful barrier magic around the gate. The mana crystals would fuel the barrier, and once activated, the magic circle would continue to gather its own energy from the surrounding area. He moved with confidence, knowing that the preparation would be enough to hold off the looming threat for some time. He rubbed his chin, deep in thought, as a frown spread across his face. Something didn't feel right to him, though the magic circle he had created was perfect. His instincts told him that there was an unusual presence nearby. He narrowed his eyes, scanning the empty streets, trying to pinpoint the source of this unsettling feeling. The Japanese personnel assisting him stood nearby, confused by Yuri's sudden shift in mood. They wondered if there was a problem with the magic circle, but Yuri was focused elsewhere. It wasn't the magic that concerned him, it was the sense that someone was lingering around unseen. Yuri's voice echoed through the streets as he called out, demanding whoever was there to show themselves, but the only response was silence. The streets, cleared in preparation for the impending dungeon break, remained eerily quiet. The personnel found it hard to believe anyone would be foolish enough to stay behind with the threat of a dungeon break looming over the area. Yet Yuri wasn't talking about a person. His instincts were sharper than that. He could feel something more, something beyond human presence. From a distance, atop a tall building, a hooded figure watched Yuri carefully. The man with his bushy, unkempt beard was Sung Ilwan. His eyes were fixed on Yuri, quietly observing the hunter's sharp senses. Ilwan understood why Yuri was so cautious. Given the source of the Russian strength, everything was falling into place, just as it had been destined. The tragedy that had been set in motion was finally beginning to unfold. Security around the gate was tight. Soldiers stood with determined expressions, fully alert as they prepared for what was to come. Tanks rolled through the streets, deployed for the imminent battle against the monsters that would soon emerge. Among the Japanese S-rank hunters, Tawada couldn't help but reflect on the situation. She knew that modern firearms had little effect on the monsters that would appear. To her, bringing in the military seemed pointless. But Sugimoto had a different perspective. If the Russian hunter failed to contain the gate, the military's presence would buy them valuable time. Time for the first line of hunters to prepare and make their move. Tawata understood what that meant. They were essentially using the soldiers as sacrificial distractions. But Sugimoto reminded her that even the hunters, standing at the forefront, weren't much different. They too would be putting their lives on the line in the face of overwhelming danger. Sugimoto's gaze remained fixed on the gate. He thought about how powerless humans were when facing such monumental disasters. No matter how strong they were, the hunters knew they were up against something far beyond human strength. Meanwhile, Yuri walked along the street, observing the mana crystals that had been carefully laid out. Everything seemed perfect. Confident in his abilities, Yuri believed that, if things went according to plan, he could handle the S-rank gate on his own. He envisioned himself being remembered as the one who cleared it single-handedly. However, he knew there was a hunter out there even more suited for that title. Someone who overshadowed his ambition. With a smirk, Yuri reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a flask. The strong scent of alcohol filled the air as he uncapped the container. Ignoring the concern of the personnel nearby, Yuri explained that it was simply a toast to calm his nerves before the upcoming battle. He promised them a spectacle like no other, one they would never forget. After taking a gulp, Yuri inquired about the number of S-rank hunters on standby. There were only 15, which seemed like a small audience for the grand show he was about to put on. Curious about the situation, he asked if the United States had sent any S-rank hunters to assist Japan. However, the personnel explained that a new S-rank gate had appeared in Maryland, and similar gates had also surfaced in England and India. Yuri's gaze narrowed as he stared at the gate before him. It was a troubling thought. There weren't enough qualified people in the world to deal with the growing number of threats. Time flew by swiftly like an arrow shot from a bow as the tension mounted. Then the crucial moment came. The dark barrier at the gate's entrance began to dissolve, fracturing like broken glass. Without warning, the personnel screamed as the gate began to open, signaling the start of the impending disaster. In the middle of the chaos at the humongous gate in Shinjuku, the hunters and military staff were caught off guard by what they saw. Their eyes widened in shock as the scene unfolded before them. Magic beasts, massive and towering, began emerging from the gate. These were no ordinary creatures. They were giants, monstrous beings usually found as top-tier bosses in A-rank gates. The hunters recoiled in fear, realizing the gravity of the situation. Giants like these were powerful, far stronger than what they had expected to face so soon. While fear gripped the onlookers, Yuri Orlov remained calm, his expression unwavering. He casually took a sip from his flask and discarded it without a second thought, confident that his preparations had been flawless. As the giants stomped forward, their size and presence intimidating all who witnessed them, Yuri activated his magic. Drawing upon the mana crystals he had at his disposal, he created a powerful barrier around the gate. The air buzzed with energy as the invisible force field formed, blocking the path of the magic beasts. The giants, unaware of the barrier, charged forward with full force. The impact was immense. The giants slammed their enormous bodies into the invisible wall, their strength futile against Yuri's magic. Yuri's face remained calm, even as the giants continued their futile assault on his barrier. He had predicted this outcome, fully confident that the massive creatures would be unable to break through his magic. However, his confidence was shattered in an instant. The hunters and military staff, who had been watching from a distance, were stunned when an even larger behemoth emerged from the gate. This creature towered over the other giants, dwarfing them in size and presence. As it stood up straight, its sheer enormity made Yuri pause. He couldn't comprehend how massive the creature was. Without hesitation, the colossal giant charged at the invisible wall with terrifying speed. The ground shook violently with the impact as it slammed into the barrier. The loud boom resonated across the battlefield, and for the first time, Yuri watched in disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how massive the creature was. The divination circle, visible only to Yuri, began to crack. Small hairline fractures spread across the barrier as the giant prepared for another strike. The creature pulled back, gathering all its strength, and hurled itself at the wall again. The second impact was even more powerful, resulting in a thunderous explosion. The light of the divination circle flickered and dissipated as the barrier shattered completely. The once impenetrable wall was gone, and the giant was now free. Its enormous hand reached out toward Yuri, the man responsible for the barrier. Panic set in as Yuri realized he was defenseless. Before he could react, the giant's massive hand closed in on him. In terror, Yuri tried to scream, but his voice was lost as the creature's mouth opened wide. With a swift movement, the behemoth swallowed Yuri whole, ending his struggle in an instant. Tanks on the battlefield unleashed their cannons at full power, firing directly at the advancing giants. However, the giants were unfazed by the onslaught. They took the blows without flinching, their massive forms unmoved by the explosions around them. With blinding speed, they charged toward the tanks, closing the distance faster than anyone had anticipated. In response, battle helicopters in the sky opened fire, raining down a barrage of bullets and missiles on the giants. The sheer firepower shook the entire battlefield, the ground trembling under the intensity of the assault. But the giants continued their advance, undeterred by the weapons that were supposed to stop them. Sugimoto, witnessing the situation, shouted in frustration. The conventional weapons were useless against these monsters, and it was clear that more direct action was needed. Tawata and Hoshino, experienced hunters, leaped into the fray, their swords raised and ready. They aimed to stop the advancing giant in its tracks. Tawata devised a plan to blind the creature, believing that it would prevent the giant from reading their movements. With their swords poised for a brutal strike, they attacked with precision and power. But the giant, moving with surprising agility for its size, evaded both of their attacks effortlessly. Tawata was left stunned, struggling to comprehend how something so massive could move with such speed. It defied all logic, and the giant's swift escape from their blades left her speechless. The realization dawned on her. This creature was far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Reporters flew in helicopters, hovering above the chaos to cover the unfolding destruction live from Tokyo. From their vantage point, they witnessed a scene of devastation that was clear even from a distance. The giants were rampaging through the city, destroying buildings and ripping out trees, as if they were attempting to erase all traces of life. The sight was gruesome, as the giants not only obliterated the environment, but were also consuming the people in their path. Despite the terrifying scene below, the reporters maintained their distance, trusting the advice of researchers who had confirmed it was safe to stay far from the monsters. Their attention shifted to the largest giant, which stood alone near the gate. Unlike the other giants that were scattered and wreaking havoc across the city, this one seemed to be guarding the gate, either waiting for someone or defending it for an unknown reason. The cameraman, observing the giant closely, made a personal observation. Despite its enormous size and the fact that it was breathing and moving, it felt lifeless, almost mechanical. The giant's movements were deliberate, as if following a program, making it seem more like a machine than a living creature. As the chaos continued, the destruction was relentless. Flames consumed buildings, and the scene below was one of absolute devastation. Only 2 of the 30 giants had been eliminated since the dungeon break, and it had already been 2 days. Time was running out, and the reporters wondered how long it would take before the giants destroyed everything. Jinwoo's eyes shot open as he suddenly awoke, his body jolting upright. Disoriented, he looked around, trying to make sense of his surroundings. It became clear to him that he was in a hospital, though he couldn't understand how he had ended up there. Shortly after, Jinho entered the room, clearly relieved but emotional. Jinwoo, still confused, struggled to comprehend the situation. He began to piece together what had happened, but it felt disjointed. The last thing he remembered seemed distant, as if from another life. Jinho's eyes welled with tears, revealing how deeply worried he had been. Jinwoo had been unconscious for 3 entire days, a fact that left him in shock. He hadn't realized how exhausted he truly was, his fatigue having accumulated over time. He hadn't had a chance to rest, and now all of that weariness had finally caught up to him. Yet even more disturbing was the memory of what the architect had shown him. The images still haunted his mind, vivid and unsettling. Jinwoo's thoughts raced. If he had been asleep for 3 days, what had transpired during that time? Turning his focus back to Jinho, Jinwoo asked about the S-rank gate that had appeared in Japan. He feared the worst. Jinho's expression shifted as he hesitated to deliver the news. The raid had failed. Jinwoo, lost in thought, considered the weight of the situation, knowing that this failure was only the beginning of an even greater storm ahead. At the Ahjin Guild, the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Myunghan sat with his head in his hands, overwhelmed by exhaustion and pain. He had dozed off again, unable to fight the fatigue that constantly weighed him down. As he stirred from his slumber, he wondered how long he had been asleep. Secretary Kim stood nearby, informing him that he had been asleep for nearly 24 hours, exactly 23 hours and 46 minutes. If he hadn't woken up soon, they had been ready to take him to the hospital following his own instructions. But now, there were 2 important matters that needed his attention. The first news caught Myunghan's attention immediately. One of the patients in an eternal slumber had regained consciousness. This was surprising, as those affected by eternal slumber rarely, if ever, woke up. And the patient who had miraculously recovered was none other than Song Jinwoo's mother. Myunghan's mind raced with thoughts. Could Jinwoo possess the ability to cure eternal slumber? The possibility lingered in his mind, leaving him both curious and unsettled. After a brief pause, Myunghan asked for the second piece of information. Secretary Kim opened the door, revealing a visitor. It was his daughter Jinhee, who stood there with numb eyes staring at her father. She witnessed his exhaustion and quietly questioning how long he had been like this, broken down and struggling to keep going. Jinwoo sat in his apartment, quietly watching the news unfold on the television. The screen displayed scenes of chaos, the newscasters describing the situation as resembling hell itself. The whole world was focused on the efforts of hunters to stop the disaster, but the situation seemed grim. As Jinwoo watched, he couldn't help but think about the similarities to the Jeju Island raid. The threat was growing, and at this rate, the entirety of Asia could be in danger. He knew he needed to act quickly. Lost in his thoughts, Jinwoo was suddenly interrupted by a voice. His sister Gina stood quietly in the room, her head lowered. She asked him not to go, her voice filled with worry. She sensed that her brother was preparing to leave for another dangerous mission. Jinwoo paused, surprised by her words. He assured her that he wasn't planning on going anywhere, and explained that he had been working too much lately, so he intended to take some time to rest. He gently tapped her on the head, telling her not to worry before walking away. Later, Jinwoo made his way to his guild office, taking a light jog to clear his mind. On the way, he stopped at a park and sat on a bench, contemplating the situation. Wanting to check on Gina, he summoned one of his shadows, Baru. Baru appeared immediately, addressing Jinwoo with respect. Jinwoo, however, noticed something amusing. Baru had been watching dramas instead of guarding Gina. Embarrassed, Baru confirmed that nothing unusual was happening with Gina, yet Jinwoo couldn't shake his concerns. He realized that Gina might have developed a trauma. She had never tried to stop him from leaving before, except during his first raid 4 years ago. The situation weighed heavily on his mind as he wondered what to do next. As Jinwoo made his way to his office, he noticed a car approaching him from behind. The window rolled down and a voice called out, asking if he was Hunter Sung Jinwoo. The voice sounded familiar, causing Jinwoo to instinctively turn around. When he saw who it was, he blinked in confusion, not expecting this encounter. The car ride soon led him to Myung-han's office for a private conversation. Jinwoo, curious about the sudden meeting, asked what business Myung-han had with him. Myung-han, the head of Ahjin Construction, introduced himself and then pulled out a check from his pocket, pushing it toward Jinwoo. He quickly made it clear that he wasn't someone who believed money could buy everything, especially not from an S-rank hunter like Jinwoo. The check was simply a token of his sincerity. Jinwoo's thoughts raced. Whatever Myung-han wanted to discuss had to be confidential, and it didn't seem like it was a typical guild invitation. When Jinwoo asked what Myung-han wanted from him, he was completely caught off guard by the response. Myung-han revealed that he suffered from the same illness that Jinwoo's mother had endured, eternal slumber. This revelation took Jinwoo by surprise. He immediately wondered if Jinho, Myung-han's son, knew about this. Myung-han reassured him that only 3 people knew of his condition: his physician, his wife, and his secretary. Now Jinwoo had become the 4th person to know. Understanding began to dawn on Jinwoo. He now realized why Chairman Myung-han had approached him directly. Myung-han looked at Jinwoo with desperation, explaining that while searching for a cure, he found only one person in the world who had recovered from the illness: Jinwoo's mother. Myung-han didn't believe this was just a coincidence. What he wanted from Jinwoo was the truth, and he promised never to forget Jinwoo's kindness if he could help him. Jinwoo fell into deep thought. This was a difficult decision, one that would have to be made today. After a moment, Jinwoo pushed the check back toward Myung-han and apologized, saying he didn't believe there was anything he could do to help. Myung-han, clearly distressed, asked how Jinwoo's mother had managed to recover completely. Jinwoo calmly replied that if he truly knew the secret and wanted to profit from it, he wouldn't have stayed quiet about it. Myung-han, seeing the finality in Jinwoo's words, nodded weakly, acknowledging his understanding. Standing up, Jinwoo told Myung-han that he had to leave and made his way to the elevator. Once inside, he let out a heavy sigh. Despite Myung-han being Jinho's father, Jinwoo didn't truly know him. He didn't know what kind of person the chairman really was, or if his illness was genuine. Jinwoo's thoughts shifted to the holy water of life, knowing that its use was limited, and he would need to use it wisely in the future. Jinwoo arrived at his guild office, where he informed Jinho about his intention to go to Japan. Jinho, completely caught off guard, reacted with shock. He couldn't believe what Jinwoo was saying, especially after watching the news. Jinho reminded Jinwoo that the situation in Japan was unlike the Jeju Island raid. The monsters appearing now were far larger and more dangerous than anything they had faced before. It was abnormal, and even for Jinwoo, this could be extremely risky. Jinwoo, however, thought about the possibilities. If he succeeded in stopping the disaster in Japan, the Ahjin Guild would gain worldwide recognition. Despite this, even Jinwoo couldn't ignore the fact that Jinho, who had always trusted him completely, was now worried. This disaster must have been more terrifying than he first imagined. After a brief pause, Jinho stood firm, declaring that he would go to Japan with Jinwoo. Surprised, Jinwoo asked Jinho what he meant. Jinho, who was normally calm, was now filled with determination. He quietly brought out a stack of newspaper clippings and printouts, all of them related to Jinwoo's achievements. Jinho pointed out that in every one of these events, the Red Gate incident, the Jeju Island raid, and the recent double dungeon, his name wasn't mentioned at all. Jinho admitted that staying by Jinwoo's side was the only thing he could be proud of. Even though he was a millionaire's son, he found it embarrassing that his achievements paled in comparison to Jinwoo's. That's why he wanted to accompany Jinwoo on whatever dangerous journey lay ahead. Jinwoo, however, had a playful response. He told Jinho that he was only joking about going to Japan. Jinho, confused by the sudden shift, questioned him, but Jinwoo simply stood up, preparing to leave the office. He told Jinho to head home for now. Though still worried, Jinho nodded, watching as Jinwoo left the office with a determined stride. As Jinwoo walked back to his apartment, his mind was filled with lingering thoughts from recent events. He reflected on his battle with the architect. Even though he couldn't use his shadow soldiers during the fight, he realized the architect's strength was almost equal to his. This revelation brought a sobering thought. There were still many individuals out there far stronger than him. The world was vast, and Jinwoo knew he wasn't at the top yet. He entered his apartment, immediately greeted by the comforting aroma of his mother's cooking. The familiar scent brought a sense of warmth and normalcy, briefly pulling him away from his heavy thoughts. Jinwoo quietly announced his arrival. "I'm home." His mother, hearing him, welcomed him with a smile. Delighted that he was back, she asked if he would be staying for dinner, and Jinwoo nodded, sitting down quietly at the dinner table. Looking around the apartment, Jinwoo noticed that Gina, his sister, was nowhere to be seen. He asked his mother where she was. His mother replied that Gina wasn't feeling hungry and had retreated to her room. Concern flashed in Jinwoo's mind, but he kept quiet, knowing his sister needed time to deal with her own worries. As he settled in, Jinwoo's mind couldn't help but wander back to his earlier meeting with Chairman Myung-han. Myung-han's offer to him had been generous, enticing even, but despite the temptation, Jinwoo hadn't felt moved. He didn't feel compelled by the promise of wealth or favors. He knew there was a bigger decision to be made. There were still many people stronger than him, but as long as his growth continued, Jinwoo felt the need to keep pushing forward. He had to be on the battlefield if he wanted to become even stronger. He knew that if this was the time to make a decisive choice, he had to be prepared. With his decision firm, Jinwoo turned to his mother and told her that he would be leaving again. His mother, though clearly understanding his resolve, couldn't help but think of his father. She smiled, reminiscing about how his father used to rush through his meals whenever someone needed his help. In a familiar gesture of support, she offered to help Jinwoo pack once he finished eating. Jinwoo quietly entered Gina's room, careful not to make a sound. His sister lay restlessly in bed, shifting from side to side as if her mind was troubled even in her sleep. Jinwoo approached her, his heart heavy with the thoughts of what lay ahead. He needed to talk to her, but he could sense her reluctance. Sitting beside her, Jinwoo hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts. His mind went back to all the times he had been on the edge of death. Recently, it had felt closer than ever. The danger he had faced wasn't unusual, but this time it had been different, more real. He had barely made it back alive. Despite this, Jinwoo couldn't help but feel grateful for the times he had returned home, safe and sound. He realized how lucky he was to still be there, sitting next to his sister. Gina, sensing her brother's presence, didn't move much. She pulled the blanket closer to her, tears silently welling up in her eyes. Jinwoo could see how much she worried about him, even though she tried to hide it. He continued to speak softly, expressing his gratitude toward her. Gina had always been there, and this time, she had tried to stop him from going, a rare moment where her fears broke through. But deep down, they both knew, no matter how much she wanted to stop him, Jinwoo would go. It was his path. Jinwoo looked at her with determination, his resolve unshaken. He promised her, no matter where he went or how far he was, he would always protect her. His words carried the weight of all the battles he had fought and the ones still to come. The next day, President Go of the Hunters Association of Korea prepared to make an important announcement regarding the crisis in Japan. Reporters from around the world had gathered, their attention fixed on him. The air was thick with anticipation as President Go stepped forward to the microphone, waiting for the perfect moment to speak. With a calm but firm voice, President Go mentioned the name that everyone was eager to hear, Hunter Sung Jinwoo. Immediately, the crowd erupted with the sound of camera shutters clicking furiously. The announcement was clear. Jinwoo had declared his intent to go to Japan. The reporters couldn't capture the moment fast enough, their cameras flashing endlessly. After the announcement, Jinwoo shook hands with President Go. It was a brief but heartfelt exchange, and the handshake between the two was caught by hundreds of photographers, their cameras documenting every moment. The decision had been made. Jinwoo would be joining the effort to face the crisis in Japan. Later, at Incheon International Airport, Jinho led the way through the bustling crowd. He carried 2 large bags filled with equipment, his face set with determination, as if he were ready for the final scene of a movie. He brushed off curious onlookers as he made a clear path for Jinwoo, who followed silently behind. The flash of cameras continued as the media sought to capture every second of their departure. As the Ahjin Guild members prepared to head toward Japan, the atmosphere around them buzzed with anticipation. Jinwoo and Jinho were now ready for the next step in their journey, their resolve unshaken as they moved forward into the unknown. President Go's message reached hunters around the globe, sparking discussions in every corner of the world. In Maryland, East America, a group of S-rank hunters gathered, their conversation revolving around Hunter Sung Jinwoo's recent journey to Japan. They were skeptical, expressing doubts about his chances of survival. One of the hunters remarked that Lady Selner, the psychic who helped awaken their powers, had not been able to upgrade Jinwoo's abilities even by one stage. To them, it seemed inevitable that Jinwoo, despite his strength, would meet his end in Japan. The group continued their talk, confident in their own enhanced abilities thanks to Lady Selner's intervention. They discussed how a normal hunter, even one as powerful as Jinwoo, had limits. One hunter voiced the belief that Jinwoo's pride in his abilities might blind him to the dangers ahead. Comparing the battle against insects, like the ants from Jeju Island, to the giants rampaging in Japan, the hunter warned that overconfidence would lead to Jinwoo's demise. Some of them found it ironic, almost amusing, that his triumph over an ant could ultimately shorten his life. Their conversation turned into a casual betting game. One hunter was so certain of Jinwoo's failure that he wagered his yacht, predicting that Jinwoo would die within a day. Another upped the stakes, betting his house that Jinwoo wouldn't last 2 days. Amidst their banter, a voice broke through. National-level hunter Thomas Andre, sitting quietly in the corner and focused on his meal, interrupted their discussion with a smirk. He declared that he would bet the Scavenger Guild's building on Jinwoo's survival. The confidence in his words silenced the room. Thomas reminded the hunters that they should be more concerned with the S-rank gate that had appeared in their own territory. The dungeon break was imminent, and instead of focusing on Jinwoo, they should be wondering how many of them would survive the coming battle. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. One of the hunters, clearly annoyed, muttered about how Thomas had a knack for ruining the mood. It wasn't the first time he had done this, they noted, and they chose to ignore him. Thomas, seemingly unfazed by the remarks, casually reflected that perhaps his time in Japan would have been more enjoyable than staying in the United States. Yet, with the impending dungeon break looming, he knew that the real thrill and chaos would unfold right where he was. In Japan, the situation was dire. The people, trapped in areas where the giants had knocked out the electricity and gas, waited in fear. They didn't know that help was coming, so they remained hopeful for the rescue teams, though their resources were dwindling. At a nursing home, a group of soldiers was struggling to manage the number of patients needing assistance. They couldn't carry everyone to safety, and time was running out. Giants were closing in, and the soldiers, prioritizing those who could move, were faced with difficult decisions. Among the group was an old man, refusing to leave the immobile patients behind. He had made a promise to stay with them, along with his wife, until their final moments. Moved by the old man's determination, one soldier chose to stay, despite knowing the danger ahead. The ground trembled, and soon the unmistakable stomping of a giant grew louder. One soldier rushed outside and saw a terrifying sight, a giant approaching swiftly, moving on all fours. Dangling from the beast's mouth was a human, lifeless. The soldier, heart racing, began firing his weapon at the approaching monster, but it was futile. Bullets were no match for the giant's immense power. The giant continued its charge, unaffected, its hand reaching out to grab one of the soldiers who tried to evade it, panic setting in. Just as the giant's hand was about to strike, a black spear appeared out of nowhere, slamming into the giant's chest with such force that it sent the massive creature flying across the nearby buildings. The giant crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact. The attack came from Jima, once the boss of the Naga Nest dungeon, and now a loyal shadow soldier under Jinwoo's command. Jima stood tall, his black spear gripped tightly in his hand. The scene left the soldiers stunned, unsure if they were witnessing reality or a dream. Their confusion only deepened when Jinwoo arrived. He warned them that they were too close to the hospital, and it wasn't safe to remain. Amidst the chaos, Jinho moved swiftly, raising his shield to protect the elderly couple from the debris scattered by the giant's fall. He was determined to stay behind, assisting in the evacuation efforts as the danger loomed ever closer. Jinwoo gave him a nod of acknowledgement. His eyes carried a steely resolve and aura unmatched. Jima, in his first real battle, went completely berserk. His fury was unstoppable as he tore through giant after giant, leaving behind a trail of destruction. The battlefield was filled with his savage power, and his spear cut down the massive creatures with ease. Each strike was lethal, and his strength was immense, rivaling that of Jinwoo's other shadow soldiers. Meanwhile, Jinwoo launched himself into the battle, moving with lightning speed. Grabbing his Demon Monarch's dagger, he dashed toward the giants with precision and determination. He shot upward, heading straight for one of the giants' faces. Jinwoo's dagger, infused with immense magic power from the Black Heart, sliced through the giant's head effortlessly. The blade, filled with dark energy, split the giant's skull in half, bringing it down with a deadly finality. As the giant collapsed, a new cry filled the air. A young girl, no older than 12, was running for her life. Tears streamed down her face as she screamed in fear. Just as its massive hand was about to snatch her, a streak of blue lightning shot through the air, striking the giant's wrist. The attack singed its skin, causing the giant to reel back in pain. The giant howled in agony, clutching its injured wrist. The one responsible for the attack was Igris, standing tall with his blue sword in hand. He had reached the girl just in time, standing protectively over her as she trembled in fear. In that moment, Iron leaped into action, joining the battle with an intense roar. He launched himself into the air behind the giant. With a mighty swing of his heavy axe, Iron brought the weapon crashing down onto the giant's head. The blow was brutal, splitting the giant's skull in two. Fluid sprayed into the air as the giant fell lifeless to the ground, the impact leaving a devastating scene. The little girl, still in shock, hid behind Igris, seeking safety in his presence. Iron, holding his axe firmly, let out another thunderous roar announcing his arrival. Igris, calm and composed, patted the girl gently on the head, reassuring her that she was safe now under their protection. Jinwoo watched the scene unfold, observing Iron's actions with a sense of satisfaction. Iron, now more powerful after his recent upgrade, was performing well. As Jinwoo stood amidst the aftermath, a soldier nervously approached him. The man seemed overwhelmed by everything that had just happened, but managed to express his gratitude. Jinwoo, with a calm and reassuring gesture, quickly gave the soldier a thumbs up, acknowledging his bravery. The soldier, still shaken, nodded, feeling both grateful and relieved. Without missing a beat, Jinwoo turned to Jinho, instructing him to assist the soldier and finish the evacuation. Jinho, always quick to respond, agreed immediately, leading the soldier away to safety. With the evacuation underway, Jinwoo shifted his focus back to the giant's lifeless corpse in front of him. The battle wasn't over yet, and there was more to be done. A steely determination filled his gaze as he prepared for the next step. He stood over the fallen giant, and with a quiet intensity, he spoke the word that would summon his dark power. Arise. Far above, inside a helicopter hovering over the battlefield, a reporter could hardly contain his shock. The scene below was almost too unbelievable to describe. His eyes widened in disbelief as the camera zoomed in on Jinwoo's army. The shadow soldiers, newly summoned and led by Jinwoo, were now tearing through the giants. Among the shadows, Jinwoo's ants, ferocious and relentless, devoured the giants without mercy. The sight of these creatures overpowering the once feared giants was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Meanwhile, at the headquarters of the Hunters Association of Japan, the news spread like wildfire. City after city was being reclaimed from the giants. Nagoya had been retaken. A giant's corpse had been found in Nakatsugawa. Shizuoka was under control once more. Reports continued to flood in. Takayama and Nagano had also been liberated. But for Matsumoto, the leader of the association, the news triggered something deeper. He shot up from his chair, eyes wide with realization. The memory of his first encounter with Jinwoo came rushing back, vividly clear in his mind. Matsumoto had seen many hunters in his time, but none like Jinwoo. There was something different about him, an unmatched power that he had sensed the moment they met at the airport. Matsumoto remembered that urgent meeting. As soon as Jinwoo arrived in Japan, Matsumoto had wasted no time. Knowing the dire situation, he had greeted Jinwoo with a sense of urgency. The giants were closing in on Osaka, and Matsumoto's plan had been straightforward. He wanted Jinwoo to focus his strength on defending the city, buying time for the association to seek aid from other countries. The interpreter had translated Matsumoto's request to Jinwoo, but what followed had caught everyone off guard. Jinwoo's refusal had been firm and absolute. The hunters from Japan, including Matsumoto, were stunned by his boldness. They hadn't expected such a response. Matsumoto had asked, almost in disbelief, what Jinwoo's plan was, but now, standing in the present, he finally understood. Jinwoo hadn't been interested in just defense. He hadn't wanted to merely hold back the giants. He had intended to defeat them all. Alone. What Jinwoo was doing now, reclaiming city after city, was exactly what Matsumoto himself had envisioned but couldn't achieve. Jinwoo was doing the impossible. At Jinwoo's command, shadows of the fallen giants shot up from the ground. It was time to bring them under his control. Standing over the newly formed shadow giants, Jinwoo decided to keep things simple with their names. One by one, he gave them straightforward titles, number 1 to number 6. These giants, now part of his shadow army, were ready to serve him in battle. Meanwhile, Baru, ever loyal and diligent, made sure to report every success. Each time a giant was taken down, Baru would inform Jinwoo of their progress, keeping him updated on the situation. Jinwoo appreciated the efficiency but had his own plans in motion. He thought about using Shadow Exchange to move swiftly and create more soldiers out of the defeated giants, further strengthening his army. Turning to Jinho, Jinwoo gave him a simple instruction. It was clear that Jinho needed rest. Jinwoo told him to get some sleep, assuring him that everything would be taken care of. Jinho, trusting his leader completely, agreed and prepared to rest. As Jinwoo surveyed the battlefield, he realized that everything had been relatively easy so far, but the real challenge was yet to come. His shadow soldiers were spread across Japan, assisting in the effort to defeat the giants. For Jinwoo, this war of attrition played to his strengths. With his nearly unlimited supply of magic power, his soldiers could keep fighting, and even if they were defeated, they would heal and return to the battle. However, the situation wasn't without its complications. While the giants were being handled, the S-rank dungeon break had caused other creatures to spill out into the cities. These lower-ranked monsters were creating chaos, forcing evacuation and suppression efforts to happen simultaneously. It wasn't just about defeating the giants anymore. The entire situation had to be brought under control. Days had passed. It was the 7th day since the dungeon break, and night had fallen over the quiet, desolate city. Jinwoo and Jinho walked through the empty streets, the silence around them almost deafening. Broken buildings lined their path, and the city that once thrived now felt like a ghost town. Their footsteps echoed as they trudged forward, the sound of their boots hitting the cracked pavement breaking the stillness. As they reached the edge of their path, their eyes caught sight of one of the giants' remains in the distance, towering ominously against the darkened skyline. Jinho, surveying the wreckage, could see how utterly ruined everything was. Suddenly, a familiar presence approached them. Hanakawa appeared, her face carrying the weight of the situation. She had been waiting for them, the only remaining person in this shattered city. As she spoke, she confirmed what Jinwoo had already suspected. There were no hunters left in Tokyo. The damage to the city was beyond measure, and the giants had spread out from this point, causing chaos. Hanakawa continued, giving a detailed account of the current situation. There were 16 S-rank hunters still active, including Jinwoo. 6 were in Japan, while others were scattered across China, Canada, India, Russia, and England. Hanakawa's words were heavy as she recounted the fallen hunters. Yuri Orlov from Russia, Hanja Goki from the Evil Spirit Guild, and Lucas Hoyle from Canada had all perished in the fight against the giants. Their losses were deeply felt, and the tragedy of it all weighed on everyone. Jinwoo stood still, deep in thought, reflecting on the grim reality before him. Deaths among A-rank hunters and below weren't even being mentioned anymore, as the focus remained on the bigger picture, the S-rank hunters who had fallen. Hanakawa had provided crucial information. There were still 31 giants left, and one of them was already making its way across the ocean toward China. The situation was dire. Japan didn't have enough high-ranking hunters to fend off the remaining giants, but thanks to Jinwoo's efforts, most of the massive creatures had already been eliminated. The remaining hunters were battling the few giants still left, with Jinwoo's shadows fighting alongside them. Jinwoo knew what needed to be done. The biggest threat remained, the last giant. It was clear to him that the final battle was approaching, yet, as he stood there, his mind wandered, drawn to a strange sense of familiarity. The sight before him, the devastation, the burning city, it reminded him of something. It resembled the Demon Castle, a place he had faced in the past. The thought gnawed at him. Could the destruction of Tokyo be connected to that place? If the Demon Castle was something created by the system, what was the architect trying to convey through it? The architect, the mysterious figure behind the system, was gone now. Jinwoo had destroyed him, and there had been no contact from him since. If that was truly the architect's real body, then perhaps the Demon Castle was a vision of the future, a glimpse of what might come. But Jinwoo wasn't one to dwell on uncertainties for long. His resolve hardened, and he clenched his fist. Whatever future the architect may have shown him, Jinwoo was determined to prevent it. He sought a strength that was unmatched, and now, in the midst of this chaos, he knew he would need every ounce of it. Jinwoo felt the time had come. Everything was ready. With a calm confidence, he indicated it was time to move. signaling Hanakawa to follow. She hesitated for a moment, unsure, pointing out that the other hunters hadn't joined them yet, but Jinwoo, always a step ahead, reassured her. They were already here. A rhythmic stomping sound grew louder as shadowy figures emerged from the fog. Jinwoo's shadow soldiers marched forward, their presence imposing. They appeared atop the broken buildings, standing tall and ready for battle. From the shadows, the towering figures of Tusk, Iron, and Igris emerged, their imposing presence radiating sheer power. Hanakawa could only watch in stunned silence as the scene unfolded before her. The shadows formed a vast and powerful force. Even the Nagas led by Jima arrived to join the battle, adding to the overwhelming display of power. Jinwoo welcomed his soldiers, and in a synchronized motion, they all knelt before him, lowering their bodies in absolute loyalty. But the moment wasn't complete yet. From the sky, with a crack of lightning speed, Baru descended. His arrival was marked by a heavy thud as he crashed into the ground, the force of his landing pushing both Jinho and Hanakawa back from the sheer impact. The ground shook, and a resounding boom echoed through the ruins. Jinwoo, smirking at the sight of his formidable army, praised his soldiers for their efforts. Baru, ever loyal, acknowledged his king with gratitude, while Jinwoo calmly instructed Jinho to stay somewhere safe with Hanakawa. Jinho, fully trusting Jinwoo, gave a firm nod and quickly moved away, ensuring Hanakawa's safety as well. Once Jinho was out of harm's reach, Jinwoo prepared for the next phase of his plan. He called upon the shadows of the giants he had slain earlier. Though they were not as massive as the giant boss, their hulking forms still carried immense power. These newly summoned shadow giants formed the front line of his army, making Jinwoo's forces seem nearly invincible. With his army now complete, Jinwoo addressed his soldiers, his eyes gleaming with fierce determination. Raising his hand high, he pointed toward his soldiers and gave the command, "Charge." At that moment, Baru flung his head back and unleashed a piercing screech, rallying the soldiers with a deafening cry. In unison, Jinwoo's shadow army surged forward, their movements like rolling thunder as the ground beneath them shook. Dust filled the air as they crossed into the giant's domain, the sheer force of their charge creating a rumble that echoed through the broken city. But as soon as they entered the giant's territory, the atmosphere shifted. The massive creature, completely unfazed by the advancing horde, narrowed its eyes, showing no signs of fear or hesitation. Then, in an instant, something strange happened. The giant seemed to vanish for a brief moment, and when it reappeared, half of Jinwoo's soldiers had been wiped out, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. Without hesitation, the giant charged forward with its massive sword raised high. It moved at an incredible speed, splitting the horde of shadows in two as it tore through them with ease. The giant's power was overwhelming, and the destruction it caused sent a clear message. This would be no easy battle. Jinwoo observed the giant's overwhelming strength, stunned by its sheer power. With a single swing of its sword, the massive creature had wiped out 100 of his soldiers. Its size alone was terrifying, but the magic power it radiated made it even worse. Jinwoo could feel a deep, unsettling urge to leave this place, its presence so unpleasant that it gnawed at him. He wondered how such a monstrous being could even exist. Jinwoo knew there were only two ways to deal with such a feeling. Either run from it and forget, or completely eradicate it. And running wasn't an option. As the dust settled, Tusk, now enlarged, faced the giant head-on. Without hesitation, Tusk inhaled deeply and unleashed a powerful blast of fire, a pillar of flame that would have melted any magic beast. But the giant was no ordinary creature. It raised its palm and blocked the fiery attack with ease, showing no signs of damage. The battlefield was filled with the cries of Jinwoo's forces as they were pummeled by the giant. Despite its massive size, the creature moved with incredible speed, faster than even the most agile hunter could hope to match. Jinwoo's once formidable army now struggled to withstand the monstrous power of the giant. The battlefield was a scene of chaos as the towering creature crushed Jinwoo's ant soldiers beneath its feet. Baru, enraged by the giant's rampage, prepared to charge at it, but Jinwoo held him back. It wasn't time yet. Baru reluctantly stepped aside, standing with Igris on either side of Jinwoo, both ready to strike but waiting for the signal. Their eagerness to join the fight was clear, but Jinwoo had a plan. He expected this challenge. The giant's strength and defense were formidable, but Jinwoo wasn't without a strategy. He had enough mana and knew he needed to be patient. using his army to find the creature's weakness. His shadow soldiers, being immortal, were perfect bait for this purpose. The giant continued its relentless assault, crushing shadow soldiers beneath its knee and pounding the ground with its massive fist. Yet, amidst the devastation, Jinwoo remained focused. Despite the overwhelming power of the giant, this battle wasn't a complete loss. In the middle of the desolate metropolis, he could still see opportunities forming as he studied the giant's movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. Jinwoo's eyes glinted as he focused on the giant, noticing something important. The giant's magic power surrounded it like armor, making it overly confident and unwilling to defend itself. But there had been one moment. It blocked an attack just once. That gave Jinwoo a clue. He summoned Kaisel, his flying wyvern. Kaisel burst from Jinwoo's shadow, spreading his massive wings wide. With a powerful flap, the wyvern readied itself for flight. Jinwoo climbed onto Kaisel's back, calling for Baru and Igris to join him. Baru extended his own wings while Igris positioned himself behind Jinwoo. With both Baru and Igris on board, Kaisel took to the air, flapping his wings with a loud cry. They ascended quickly, shooting through the air straight toward the giant's head. Despite being engaged in battle with 1,000 shadow soldiers, the giant's sharp eyes caught sight of Kaisel and Baru speeding toward it. Its attention briefly shifted, sensing the oncoming threat. Igris was the first to engage the giant, wielding the demon monarch's sword with precision. As he swung the blade, a streak of blue lightning shot toward the giant's forehead, but the massive creature reacted with incredible speed, tilting its head to avoid the strike. Igris, undeterred, immediately followed up with a second attack, using all his strength, but the giant dodged again, moving faster than lightning itself. However, Igris did not relent. He continued his assault, striking again and again with unyielding determination, each swing of the sword filled with purpose. Jinwoo watched closely from Kaisel's back, observing the battle unfold. The giant, sensing the threat, swung its massive sword toward them. In a swift reaction, both Jinwoo and Igris leaped off Kaisel's back, just as the giant's sword came crashing down. As Jinwoo landed, he saw Kaisel disintegrate into dust. Losing his soldiers always came with a sting, but Jinwoo knew it brought him one step closer. He had identified the giant's weak point, its face. Igris launched another strategic attack. This time he used his Demon Monarch's sword to generate a powerful lightning effect. The air crackled as the blade sent blinding streaks of lightning toward the giant, overwhelming the creature's vision. The barrage of lightning created the perfect opening for Jinwoo. Seizing the moment, Jinwoo dashed forward at lightning speed, his dagger in hand, and sliced across the giant's eye. The giant howled in agony, its pain filling the battlefield. Jinwoo smirked as he watched his attack work. Before the giant could recover, Baru entered the fray. With his claws extended, he rushed toward the giant, digging deep into its flesh, causing further distraction. The giant, disoriented and overwhelmed, struggled to defend itself against the relentless attacks. Jinwoo, now fully focused, gripped the Demon Monarch's daggers tightly, preparing for the final strike. Igris, ever loyal, was close behind, readying his sword for the next move. With a surge of power, Jinwoo activated Ruler's authority, propelling himself toward the giant's head. Jinwoo slashed hard at the giant's eyes by using his skill mutilation. The battlefield erupted in chaos as lightning and fire rained down on the giant, while shadow soldiers clawed and bit at its massive body. Hanakawa watched in awe, realizing this was no longer a battle between hunters and monsters. It had become something far beyond that, a clash of monsters against monsters. A towering magic beast the size of a skyscraper fought against a hunter who commanded an army of 1,000 minions. It was hard to tell which side was more terrifying. Jinho stood proudly, his attention fully focused on Jinwoo as the two titans clashed. His pride only grew as he watched Jinwoo in action. At that moment, Jinwoo drove his dagger into the giant's eye. The giant recoiled, flailing in pain, but Jinwoo held firm. It was working. He gripped the dagger lodged in the giant's eye and activated his skill mutilation. His other dagger relentlessly tore through the giant's eyeball, sending fluid splattering everywhere. Despite the violent thrashing of the giant's torso, Jinwoo didn't let go. Hanging on, he called for Baru. With precision, Baru flew into the opening Jinwoo had created. Together, they attacked the giant's face. Giant opened its mouth in a silent scream as ants began swarming its feet. The giant's body buckled when one of its ankle tendons was severed, and despite the ground shaking beneath them, Jinwoo and Baru kept up their relentless attack. Jinwoo activated mutilation again and again, his daggers shredding the giant's flesh as the beast writhed in agony. But eventually, its resistance faded. Its massive body began to tilt, crashing to the ground with a deafening boom. The battle was over as the giant had fallen. Igris stood beside Jinwoo, his towering and silent form ever watchful. A notification appeared in Jinwoo's vision. The enemy had been defeated. A series of notifications followed, and with them came the familiar words, he had leveled up. Jinwoo noted the message, observing calmly that the enemy had been defeated, which was unusual after defeating a boss of the gate. Jinho, excited and breathless, called out to Jinwoo, rushing towards him with his usual enthusiasm. He marveled at Jinwoo's incredible strength, clearly in awe that the giant boss had been taken down so decisively. Jinwoo, however, remained composed. There was something amiss. The system hadn't acknowledged the dungeon's completion, and no message confirming the defeat of the dungeon boss had appeared. He recognized that the raid wasn't over yet. Moreover, there was no black smoke, a clear sign that he wouldn't be able to extract the shadow of the giant. As expected, when he attempted to extract it, a notification confirmed it. Shadow extraction was not possible on this target. He had suspected as much. Jinwoo's expression darkened with the realization. While he was reflecting on these unexpected developments, the disturbing sound of cracking bones reached his ears. The giant's jaw was moving, its mouth slowly parting as if something was emerging from within. Jinwoo immediately readied himself for battle, his instincts sharp and precise. His two daggers appeared in his hands, their blades glinting as he dropped into a combat stance, prepared for whatever came next. But then, a voice, one that Jinwoo recognized, echoed from the giant's mouth. It was Baru. The Ant King, covered in the giant's blood and entrails, stepped out from within the massive creature. Jinwoo relaxed instantly, realizing it was only Baru, who had been completely hidden by the overwhelming mana of the giant. A sudden storm of wind swept through the area, powerful enough to uproot trees from the ground. Jinwoo quickly scanned his surroundings, his eyes landing on the corpse of the giant. The massive creature had released an enormous amount of mana upon its death, creating a blast that had cleared everything in the vicinity. Jinwoo's senses heightened as he recognized the surge of energy. A powerful magic storm was raging, and his first thought was of Jinho. Spinning around, Jinwoo's tension eased when he saw Jinho safely held in Igris's arms, unharmed by the storm. All the mana that had once resided within the giant had been absorbed into the gate nearby, as though it had been consumed by it. Jinwoo noticed a sharp sting on his cheek and realized he had been cut by the force of the mana. This was something entirely new to him. No ordinary magic had ever affected him this way before. Determined to uncover the mystery, Jinwoo instructed Jinho to stay behind, reassuring him with a quick glance. Though worried, Jinho nodded and urged Jinwoo to be cautious. With no hesitation, Jinwoo turned and headed toward the ominous gate. There was something strange inside, something his heightened senses picked up on immediately. Jinwoo dashed forward, stepping through the gate with his shadow soldiers close behind. As he entered, the vastness of the dungeon hit him. It was unlike anything he had seen before. The space was immense, far larger than any high-ranked dungeon he had ever encountered. The passage stretched endlessly in all directions, tall and wide enough to accommodate the towering giants that had passed through. Baru, ever attentive, spoke up, alerting Jinwoo to an odd sound. Jinwoo heard it too, faint laughter coming from deep within the dungeon in the direction of the boss. The laughter was unsettling and Jinwoo's expression hardened. Someone was laughing despite his intrusion into the gate. The audacity intrigued him. Without pausing, Jinwoo gave the signal to move forward, his mind focused on discovering the source of that foul laughter. The giant stood before Jinwoo, its laughter echoing through the dungeon. Its massive body was bound in thick black chains, which wrapped around its neck, torso, and limbs, some of them piercing its flesh. Despite being restrained, the giant seemed amused, baring its teeth in a grin. The giant mocked the ruler's unseen enemies as it spoke. It welcomed Jinwoo, addressing him as a monarch, as if recognizing him as someone significant. Jinwoo approached, understanding that this bound creature was the true boss of the dungeon. The giant demanded to be freed, saying it knew the plans of the rulers and had vital information to share with the other monarchs. However, its attitude suddenly shifted when it looked closer at Jinwoo. The giant's amusement disappeared, and a look of recognition turned into confusion and anger. It realized that Jinwoo was not the monarch it had expected, and this discovery visibly frustrated it. Jinwoo, piecing together the giant's words, asked him whether the rulers, whoever they were, had been the ones to put the giant in this chained state. The giant then revealed that it had been trapped and used by the rulers as part of a much larger plan. They were laying the groundwork for a future conflict, a real war. Jinwoo observed the situation closely, his mind reflecting on the giant's apparent intelligence. Over time, he had tried to communicate with powerful, intelligent creatures, hoping to understand the forces behind them. However, none had ever given him a clear explanation about their origins or the entities that controlled them. As he faced the massive creature, Jinwoo sought to probe further, hoping to unravel the mysteries. He asked the giant about the rulers, seeking more insight into the elusive forces shaping the conflicts he found himself entangled in. The giant responded with an unexpected revelation. The rulers were ancient enemies of the monarchs. This disclosure made Jinwoo pause in thought as he considered the implications. If the rulers were the enemies of the monarchs, he wondered if that automatically made them his enemies as well, given his growing connection to the monarchs. The giant, bound and towering above, confirmed Jinwoo's suspicions. He revealed that he too was a monarch and explained that both the monarchs and the rulers were targeting Jinwoo. At this point, Jinwoo lacked the strength to confront these powerful factions head on. According to the giant, Jinwoo would need more than just strength to survive this ongoing struggle. He would need influence, a way to tip the scales in his favor. The giant offered his assistance, proposing that if Jinwoo released him, he would help Jinwoo gain the influence he required. However, Jinwoo remained skeptical. The idea of a monster helping a human was absurd to him. He found it difficult to trust such a proposition, but the giant assured Jinwoo that he would prove his intentions. Suddenly, the giant began to chant a spell. His lips moved rapidly, almost unnaturally, as if his voice had been sped up. In response, the dormant magic power within the lair began to swirl, gathering around the giant in a display of raw power. Sensing the imminent danger, Jinwoo immediately summoned his daggers, preparing for a potential attack. The giant continued his incantation in a strange, ancient language, and a familiar chime signaled an incoming notification. The system revealed new information to Jinwoo. The king of giants, known as Legia and the monarch of the beginning, had activated the Oath of Sincerity. This powerful oath would bind both the caster and the recipient, preventing either from telling lies once accepted. The system asked Jinwoo whether he wished to accept the Oath of Sincerity. He was presented with the choice of accepting or declining this agreement, and for a moment, he hesitated. His eyes were drawn to the giant's title, King of Giants. The gravity of the situation weighed on him, and Jinwoo paused to think carefully about his next step. After reflecting for a short while, Jinwoo made his decision and accepted the oath. Another chime sounded from the system, indicating that the deal had been sealed. With the Oath of Sincerity now activated, both Jinwoo and the giant could no longer lie to each other until they mutually agreed to cancel the oath. The pact was now in effect, and both parties were bound by its rules. Once the oath was accepted, the King of Giants reiterated his earlier offer, stating once again that if Jinwoo released him, he would provide help in the battles to come. Jinwoo, now influenced by the oath, found himself agreeing to trust the giant completely. However, as soon as he tried to express his trust, something strange happened. His throat felt constricted, and no words came out. Bewildered, Jinwoo realized that he couldn't speak the falsehood. The King of Giants burst into laughter, amused by Jinwoo's confusion. The Oath of Sincerity was working perfectly, ensuring that neither of them could speak a lie. Jinwoo now fully grasped the weight of the oath, realizing that deception was no longer possible in this crucial negotiation. Jinwoo then shifted his focus to a different matter, questioning why the King of Giants could communicate so freely, unlike the other creatures he had encountered from the gates. The King of Giants was intrigued by the question, but Jinwoo clarified that he was referring to the monsters that emerged from the gates. The King of Giants explained that those beings Jinwoo referred to were the residents of chaos. He pointed out that it was a mistake to compare the monarchs, who ruled over these creatures, with the residents of chaos themselves. The monsters coming through the gates were merely stragglers, prisoners of chaos who had been enslaved for so long that their consciousness had deteriorated. Their minds had eroded, making them incapable of rational thought. However, he as a king was different. He had maintained his rationality and endured the long years of captivity, waiting patiently for the day when he would be freed. He explained that it was only through his sheer will that he had been able to retain his mind. And now, he had finally encountered Jinwoo, the one who could potentially set him free. Jinwoo then shifted the conversation toward the ruler's army, questioning about the soldiers with silver armor and wings. The King of Giants confirmed that these beings were indeed the soldiers of the rulers. When Jinwoo asked why the rulers were sending these creatures and these demons to Earth, the King of Giants responded with a chilling explanation. He reminded Jinwoo that the rulers were preparing for war. Their goal was to turn Earth into a battlefield where they could fight against the monarchs. The plan was simple but devastating. They intended to flood the world with magic energy, transforming it into a battleground for the coming conflict between the rulers and monarchs. Jinwoo, still trying to understand the full scope of the situation, struggled with the reasoning behind using Earth as a war zone, but King of Giants' explanation made it clear that the rulers sought to reshape Jinwoo's world into a place where their magic could thrive, setting the stage for the ultimate war between the two powerful factions. Jinwoo sank into deep thought as he processed the information. If the monsters that emerged from the gates were seen as disasters, then the magical energy they brought with them had been considered a blessing by many. Not only hunters, but most civilians believed that the magical stones and gems, which held concentrated magic energy, were invaluable resources. These objects had become the greatest sources of energy in the world. But now, Jinwoo realized that these seemingly beneficial items were actually just the early signs of a larger, more ominous plan. They were laying the groundwork for an impending war. The King of Giants continued to explain, revealing that there was no better way to plant magic in a world that lacked it than to use the blood of those who already possessed such power. The rulers had chosen to exploit the hostages they had captured to introduce magic energy into Earth. As more blood was spilled, the magic energy in the world became increasingly concentrated. According to King of Giants, this was the direct result of the demon's blood that had been shed on the battlefield. Magic energy was strengthening the world, preparing it to withstand the coming war. The ruler's plan was to make the world durable enough so that it wouldn't collapse from the shock of the upcoming conflict. Jinwoo, still piecing together the full picture, asked what exactly he meant by war. The King of Giants explained that it would be a rematch between the rulers and the monarchs. The world Jinwoo lived in would soon be turned into hell, and it was going to happen much sooner than anyone expected. He warned that there wasn't much time left. Neither the rulers nor the monarchs would stand idly by once they realized that he had made contact with Jinwoo. It was even possible that the rulers were already making moves. Jinwoo couldn't help but wonder why both sides seemed so focused on him. He questioned why it felt as if they were all after him. The King of Giants then revealed a startling truth. Jinwoo's power, the strength that had become part of him, wasn't truly his own. Its original owner had betrayed the rulers by passing it on to him, making Jinwoo an enemy of both the rulers and the monarchs. But amidst this chaos, the King of Giants made a promise. He vowed to remain by Jinwoo's side and fight alongside him, offering his loyalty despite the looming threat. In return, all he wanted was to be freed from these chains. Jinwoo, with a sharp gaze, considered the situation. He thought that if King of Giants truly wanted to help him, becoming one of his shadow soldiers would be the easiest solution. However, King of Giants was startled by this suggestion and hesitated. For a brief moment, King of Giants could see the Shadow Monarch within Jinwoo's human form. The King of Giants then explained that the monarchs and rulers had astral bodies, and once an astral body died, it would disappear and couldn't be turned into a shadow. Because of this, King of Giants said he couldn't become one of Jinwoo's soldiers. He asked again if that explanation would be enough to gain Jinwoo's help. Jinwoo listened and understood the situation, but something about it still didn't feel right to him. He felt as though he was missing an important detail. As these thoughts ran through his mind, King of Giants pleaded once more for Jinwoo to free him from his chains. Jinwoo moved toward King of Giants, who was shackled with a demon monarch's dagger in his hand. He began cutting through the chains, starting with the first one. King of Giants remained calm as his shackles started to fall, one after the other. Jinwoo continued, cutting a second chain, and then a third. However, when he leaned in to cut the chain attached to the King of Giants' back, his heart sank unexpectedly. Jinwoo paused and looked at King of Giants carefully. He wanted to confirm something else. King of Giants had repeatedly promised to be on Jinwoo's side, but there was another important question Jinwoo needed to ask. He wanted to know if King of Giants would side with humans. When Jinwoo asked his question, King of Giants remained silent, unable to respond. The oath of sincerity that bound King of Giants made it impossible for him to answer. Jinwoo's eyes shifted to the back of his neck, where a cold and shiny black essence stone was embedded. As long as that essence stone was part of him, King of Giants was bound to obey the rulers, just like any other magic beast, including following their orders to kill humans. Suddenly, murderous intent surged from King of Giants as he attempted to strike Jinwoo. With his freed right hand, King of Giants aimed for Jinwoo's temple. However, the chain still restrained him, keeping him just out of reach. Jinwoo quickly reacted, ducking to avoid the attack and driving his dagger deep into his chest. Jinwoo's dagger pierced through him, and he coughed up blood, but Jinwoo knew that a single strike wouldn't be enough to deal with the danger the King of Giants posed. This magic beast was too dangerous to let live, and Jinwoo couldn't risk King of Giants becoming another threat to the world. With his final decision made, Jinwoo repeatedly stabbed his chest, evading his desperate attempts to fight back. After a couple of strikes, the King of Giants finally stopped moving. It was over. Jinwoo pulled his dagger from his body. King of Giants looked directly into Jinwoo's eyes and smiled, realizing that his time had come to an end. Even as he neared death, King of Giants gave a final ominous warning, stating that as the conflict between humans and the forces of chaos intensified, the world would become a battlefield. His final words were filled with malice as he wished for everything Jinwoo cared about to burn to ashes. However, Jinwoo's cold and determined gaze reflected his resolve. Without a moment's hesitation, Jinwoo ended it all. He swiftly swung his dagger, cutting off both King of Giants' sentence and his head in one clean motion. The sharp sound of the blade slicing through the air marked the end of King of Giants' life. After Jinwoo defeated the King of Giants, the system notifications appeared, confirming that he had defeated the boss of the dungeon, King of Giants, one of the 9 original monarchs. Jinwoo gained a massive amount of experience points from the battle. He had hoped to gain new shadow soldiers from this victory, but unfortunately, none could be made from King of Giants. Jinwoo's reflection appeared in the clear, mirror-like surface of the Essence Stone that had been a part of King of Giants. He decided that he would take the Essence Stone as a souvenir from this battle, a small trophy from the fight against the powerful monarch. With King of Giants' death, a powerful wave of magic energy surged into the human realm, signaling the beginning of a significant transformation in the world. The balance of power was shifting as the forces of chaos made their move. Amidst the aftermath, the sound of an electronic chime echoed as system notifications appeared again. Jinwoo had leveled up several times, and his new level was now 122. A few days before the king's death, a helicopter from the Hunter Command Center landed on the grounds of a luxurious mansion. The sound of the helicopter blades echoed as it touched down, signaling the arrival of important visitors. Inside the mansion, Christopher Reed, a national-level hunter, was not expecting any visitors that day. However, he soon realized that the vice director of the Hunter Command Center and Ms. Sellner had come to meet him. Christopher greeted the vice director and Ms. Sellner, acknowledging that it had been a long time since their last meeting. The vice director informed Christopher that they had something important to discuss and asked him to have everyone leave the room for privacy. Christopher instructed his maid to ensure that no one approached the room until the meeting was over, and the maid quickly obeyed. As they settled, Christopher assumed the visit was about a newly spawned S-rank gate somewhere in the east. However, he immediately made it clear that if that was the case, he had no intention of going. Ms. Sellner, however, was not there to talk about a gate. She explained that there was a much more serious problem than any gate. Christopher, unfazed, listened as Ms. Sellner revealed that he might be murdered in the near future. While Christopher respected Ms. Sellner for what she had done for him in the past, he didn't believe the seriousness of the warning. His gaze turned cold as he questioned who could possibly pose such a threat to him. Ms. Sellner explained that she had recently had a dream about him. In the dream, Christopher was surrounded by men, which led her to believe that his life was in danger. Christopher's frustration grew, and he found it hard to accept that she had come all the way to deliver a warning based solely on a dream. Despite the tension, Ms. Sellner remained calm, closing her eyes as she recalled the details of her vision. But Christopher's patience was wearing thin. He couldn't believe that she had traveled all this way to tell him something he considered unbelievable and baseless. Christopher Reed's frustration boiled over as he shouted, reminding Ms. Sellner that he was well aware of her past before she awakened. There were rumors surrounding the source of her unique ability, some saying it stemmed from the fact that she had been a psychic before her awakening. His face twisted with irritation as he declared that, as a national-level hunter, no one had the power to kill him. Despite Christopher's confidence, Ms. Sellner remained firm in her warning. She insisted that in her dream, his death was certain, but Christopher wasn't convinced. He dismissed her dream, finding it hard to believe that anyone could pose a real threat to him. Even if he did believe her, Christopher asked who he could possibly turn to for protection. He was a national-level hunter. There was no one who could guard him from such a threat. Ms. Sellner, however, suggested that there might be one person who could help, Hunter Sung Jinwoo. She believed that Jinwoo might have the power to protect Christopher. At this, Christopher frowned, the name unfamiliar yet intriguing. The idea of relying on someone else for protection unsettled him, but Ms. Sellner's words had planted a seed of doubt in his mind. News quickly spread around the world that all the giants had been eliminated. People on social media were buzzing with talk of a new national-level hunter who had emerged. Unlike the incident at Jeju Island, this time it wasn't just Koreans who were speaking about the remarkable feat. The global response was different, with recognition coming from various countries. One giant that had managed to escape across the ocean was dealt with by Ryu's Kang, a powerful hunter from China. Meanwhile, in Japan, the head of the Hunters Association, Shigeo Matsumoto, turned himself in. Though his exact reasons were unclear, it seemed that he wanted to take some form of responsibility for his actions, leaving many to wonder about his motives. On the opposite side of the world, in Maryland, USA, a group of American hunters had just successfully cleared an S-rank gate. They were getting ready for a celebration party hosted by the government to honor their achievement. The atmosphere was filled with triumph, but the world was still adjusting to the significant changes that recent events had caused. Among the hunters, there was casual talk about the party. They marveled at the grand scale of the event, realizing that clearing an S-rank gate was a bigger deal than they had anticipated. They mentioned how the raid had gone more smoothly than expected, making the victory feel even sweeter. As the hunters relaxed, Thomas Andre, the powerful American hunter, walked in and approached them. He reminded the group of a bet they had made, mentioning how one had bet his yacht, another his mansion, and he teased the third about what he had bet. The third hunter nervously clarified that he hadn't bet anything, trying to avoid Thomas's playful challenge. Thomas then grabbed the hunter's tie, commenting on how nice it looked. Despite the hunter's protests, Thomas playfully snatched the tie and tossed it aside. Laura, Thomas's assistant, entered the room and interrupted the lighthearted banter with more serious news. She informed Thomas that there was an issue. The list of guilds participating in the upcoming International Guild Conference had been released, and Korea's Ahjin Guild was included. Laura explained that this was Hunter Sung Jinwoo's guild. Hearing this, Thomas smirked, realizing that this meant Sung Jinwoo would be coming to the US for the conference. The thought of the powerful Korean hunter arriving seemed to intrigue him, as the mood in the room shifted from celebration to anticipation for what was to come. Jinwoo was deep in thought after the intense battle. He reflected on his decision to kill the king, knowing it was the correct choice. The king had exerted an overwhelming amount of pressure, even with his powers sealed by the strange chains. Jinwoo realized that if the king had been fully freed and allowed to roam the world, the consequences would have been disastrous. It was fortunate that Jinwoo had uncovered the king's true intentions before that could happen. Now, more than ever, Jinwoo felt the need to become stronger to face the challenges ahead. The battlefield was littered with broken buildings and cracked earth, evidence of the fierce confrontation that had just taken place. But the battle was over, and the shadows of the fallen giants assembled around Jinwoo. Jinho, standing beside Jinwoo, admired his leader's power. He was in awe of what Jinwoo had accomplished, marveling at the sheer strength it took to defeat such an enemy. Jinwoo, while satisfied with the outcome, acknowledged that one giant had managed to escape across the ocean. Despite that, the victory meant their forces had grown even stronger. Around them, soldiers who had witnessed Jinwoo's abilities for the first time were stunned. They couldn't believe what they had just seen, whispering among themselves about the incredible display of power. Meanwhile, Jinho stood proudly, observing the awe of those around him. He wasn't surprised by their reactions. After all, it was the first time many had witnessed the full extent of Hunter Sung Jinwoo's incredible abilities. Hanakawa approached Jinho, catching his attention. At first, Jinho thought she was looking for Jinwoo, but to his surprise, she said it was for him. Handing him a cell phone, she stepped back as Jinho answered the call. His expression quickly changed as he listened, eyes widening with concern. Jinho apologized to Jinwoo, explaining that he had to return to Korea immediately. He wasn't sure about the details, but he had been informed that some family matters had come up. Jinho, still processing the situation, nodded and prepared to leave. With a farewell to Jinwoo, he boarded a helicopter that was ready to take him back. As the helicopter ascended into the sky, Jinho sat quietly in deep thought. His mother's voice over the phone had been unusually shaky, something that worried him. He couldn't help but wonder what could possibly be wrong. Yet, part of him tried to brush it off, convincing himself that it could be nothing serious. The sound of the helicopter blades filled the air, echoing his uncertainty as they flew back to Korea. At Incheon International Airport, Jinho arrived, feeling a sense of unease. Waiting for him was Secretary Kim of the Ahjin construction. The secretary quickly approached, informing Jinho that a car had been prepared for him. Confused, Jinho followed along, unsure of what was happening. Secretary Kim advised Jinho to brace himself, explaining that it was a difficult time, but promised to explain everything on the way. As they drove toward their destination, Jinho's heart pounded with worry. His questions grew, but he sensed something serious was happening. They soon reached the hospital. As the car came to a stop, Secretary Kim broke the news. President Yoo Myung-han, Jinho's father, had fallen into eternal sleep. The words hit Jinho like a hammer, and his world seemed to collapse. Jinho's heart broke, and an anguished scream escaped him as he called out for his father. He wanted to rush to his side, but Secretary Kim quickly stopped him. The secretary explained that Jinho, being a hunter who couldn't yet fully control his magic, could worsen his father's condition just by being near him. Feeling despondent, Jinho turned away from his father's bedside, only to notice Secretary Kim standing nearby with a black leather portfolio in hand. Jinho questioned its significance, and Secretary Kim explained that it was something his father had been working on before collapsing. The secretary had been holding on to it in case President Myung-han woke up and asked for it, but now, it seemed more fitting that Jinho should have it. Jinho opened the portfolio to find it filled with newspaper clippings, organized like a scrapbook. They were articles about his older brother Jin Sung and his older sister Jin Hee, meticulously preserved by their father. Jinho smiled bitterly as he realized how much his father had kept up with their lives. He couldn't help but think how similar his father was to him in this regard. It wasn't just about his siblings' competitions, exhibitions, and concerts, but even Jinho's recent ventures. As Jinho flipped through the pages, his heart tightened when he reached the last section. The final pages were all about him. Articles from gossip columns, small press reports. Everything about Jinho had been carefully clipped and stored. It became clear that his father had been keeping track of his progress, just as he had with the others. Secretary Kim quietly told Jinho that it wasn't a lack of love that had driven President Myung-han to be distant. It was that his expectations for Jinho had been just as immense as his love. The realization brought tears to Jinho's eyes, tears he could no longer hold back. His emotions overwhelmed him, and he broke down. Secretary Kim gently suggested that they head back to the residence. Jinho, wiping his tears, agreed. Though his heart was heavy, the understanding that his father had always cared for him brought a small sense of comfort. Suddenly, Jinho flinched, feeling something strange. He looked around, confused, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. Jinho quietly dismissed it, thinking perhaps it was just his nerves. Secretary Kim, noticing his unease, asked if everything was all right, but Jinho simply nodded and said it was nothing. Together, Jinho and Secretary Kim left the hospital room where Chairman Myung-han was resting. They walked down the long hallway and eventually exited the building. As the sound of their footsteps faded, the atmosphere grew still. From the shadows, Jinwoo emerged silently. He had been observing the entire scene, feeling a wave of emotion as he watched Jinho. Jinwoo, thinking about his friend, felt a small pang of emotion. He quietly remarked to himself about Jinho, knowing how deeply the young man cared for his father. Jinwoo carefully took out one of the 5 Elixir of Life bottles from his inventory. With care, he gently propped up Chairman Myung-han's unconscious body and administered the elixir. Meanwhile, outside the hospital, a car arrived. Jin-hee stepped out and made her way inside, feeling a heaviness in her heart. As she walked down the hallway, something caught her attention. She paused, looking around, uncertain of what had just drawn her focus. Entering her father's room, Jin-hee was stunned to see her father Myung-han awake. Tears filled her eyes as she rushed to his side, overwhelmed with disbelief and joy. She couldn't comprehend how this had happened, seeing her father awake after being in an eternal sleep for so long. Myung-han, just as surprised, asked the doctor for an explanation. The doctor was equally astonished, mentioning how such a miraculous recovery had never been recorded before. Waking up from eternal sleep was unheard of, and he couldn't begin to imagine how the media would react to such a story. As the emotional reunion unfolded, Jinwoo quietly slipped away, leaving the hospital as unnoticed as he had come. The sound of his departure was soft and quiet as he exited. Walking outside, Jinwoo thought about the moment and the significance of what had just happened. With a small smile, he whispered to himself, "It's a little early, but happy birthday, Jinho." Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching!